I'm assuming today somebody somewhere used their iPad, their laptop, or their phone to look for information and to probably do some research. The internet as we know it today is significantly mutating to something else. Has anybody come across the terms Web3 or crypto or NFTs or Bitcoin? Yeah? So all these technologies are somehow related. The internet in the 90s was essentially a black screen. It used to look like this. So those of you who know how to code and all that, you know about MS-DOS and how boring the internet was then. And then the internet where it is now, you have the Facebooks, you have the Googles and the Netflixes, etc. And they use lots of your data. At some point, you have to insert your card details and your entire profile, and somebody knows about you. So whenever you're watching a Netflix, for example, it keeps proposing the next thing you should watch. So the internet is progressing to Web 3.0, which is basically where the users own their own data. And some platforms like the Brave platform are supposed to be rewarding you for the usage of your data. So what does this look like? The underpinning elements of the future internet is privacy and trust. Whenever you use the internet, you probably want to make a payment, but you're not sure whether there's a phantom landing page that's going to, disappear. You've heard of rug pull scams. Anybody had heard of rug pull scams? So you're not sure of the underlying aspects. So around the 90s, there was this society known as the cypherpunks, okay? They were pushing the agenda that privacy is an important aspect of the next generation of the internet. Now, this was because they felt the governments always control data, and they can determine or push agenda depending on the data that's collected. For those of you who come from developing countries like myself, there's instances of election rigging and all that, and people always say the government stole the votes and the data to use it in their favor. And those of you who watched the Cambridge Analytica documentary probably saw that. So in 2008, something significant happened. And this was the Bitcoin white paper was drafted, or rather was released by a fellow called Satoshi Nakamoto. You can raise your hand if you've heard of that fellow or group of people known as Satoshi Nakamoto. So Satoshi Nakamoto borrowed ideas from these guys here, Stuart Haber and Scott Stonetta, who were computer scientists, and they wrote about how to timestamp information on documents to avoid it being backdated or forward dated. So he came up with the suggestion that there'll be a version of the internet where people can exchange value. Value meaning data, money, or any sort of medium that can be tokenized and put on the internet, peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer means getting rid of the intermediary. An intermediary meaning a bank, for instance. For you to send money to your friend, let's say Alice wants to send money to Bob, presently it has to go through one of your banks, and then your bank has a clearinghouse system, and then the money probably gets there after a few hours or after a few days, depending if it's an international transaction. So his idea was remove that person and enable transactions to take place within 10 minutes of sending. So something known as blockchain came about. It was there from the 90s, but this paper amplified blockchain. Those of you who've heard of blockchain and those of you who haven't heard of blockchain, it's a very simple concept. It's an append-only ledger. You cannot, it's tamper-resistant. So once the data is written, it's written. So it's read-only, and the data is tied to, so it's a block of data, and then the security links it to the previous data. So it's like holding your friend, and the chain becomes longer, and that concept becomes known as proof of work. So the longer the chain, the more tamper-resistant the chain is. So that's the blockchain. That's essentially the idea underpinning the Bitcoin ledger. From there, in about 2015, something more special happened. Not quite more special, but significant to an extent. The Ethereum blockchain came about. How many people have heard of Vitalik Buterin or Ethereum? Right. So, I'm sure you've heard of Turing, the scientist Turing. So Ethereum came about, and it created this EVM, a virtual machine that was perfect in computation. Okay. So it took the idea further and brought about smart contracts. But the logic of smart contracts wasn't so new, because in about 1997, Nick Szabo had talked about smart contracts. Now, smart contracts essentially are, think of a vending machine. You put your coin, you press what you want, if it's a packet of crisps, and it comes out. So it operates on if-then-else logic. Now, Ethereum enables people to build applications on top of the blockchain using the smart contracts. That is basically nothing fancy. And this is what it enables. It creates something known as decentralized finance. This is what the current state of finance looks at the top, the traditional system. There's too many parties involved, and what decentralized finance does is cut that down. With the Ethereum blockchain, you can get transactions done in about 6 minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's proper fast. These are some of the apps sitting within blockchains and the new ecosystems being created. So you have wallets, you have gaming platforms, you have NFTs, you have, let's say, liquidity pools, you have plenty of things. However, there's something missing in all those things. There's rug pulls, there's scams, there's all sorts of things. And the oracles that feed data to the smart contracts, and so they aren't on point, lack of a better term. So comes in AI. AI, you use potentially ChatGPT every day for your research. But AI comes in different formats, shapes and forms. So there's machine learning, neural networks, neural language processing, and robotics in the industries. Now, when these two worlds of Web3 and AI sit together, it becomes sort of unbeatable, because AI is this little brother that's always on its feet, thinking really fast, and with the blockchain and the smart contracts, they're there to regulate it and staple it down. So you use AI agents within that ecosystem to pull data, to make sure that what's being read, let's say in public procurement, there's pools of data. So the AI can understand the language and probably simplify it or standardize it to different formats. So that's what the AI agents do. And then these are the benefits of this. So you have enhanced data management, enhanced efficiency, scalability, and innovative data management. However, these are all gamified concepts. For them to sit in the real world, like how Bitcoin is supposed to sit in the real world, how are we going to make it safe for institutional adoption? regulations come in play. How is it going to be used ethically? How is it going to comply with the social norms? How is it going to comply with data regulations? And how are places like universities going to adopt it, or government institutions, are they going to adopt it? So for instance, as students, how is AI being used within your courses? You know what I mean? So it's something that you have to think about. So in terms of regulation, you have the new EU AI Act that categorizes the level of risk determined subject to how the AI is being used. So if it's limited risk, the regulation is minimal. If it's medium risk, it's somewhere there, but if it's high risk, the governments have to look at it. And the EU AI Act applies to not just EU countries, but as long as, let's say, servers are sat in the EU or it's affecting EU nationals, it's going to affect people. And then last but not least is the GDPR. Something like blockchain and smart contracts, how they function is they write the data and it's tamper resistant. But there's rights like right to be forgotten, access of data and all those things. So they're causing tensions in terms of the transparency principles that the Web3 technologies and the AI are bringing about, and as compared to what real life scenarios require. So this is where we are, and Web3 is literally, in sum, Web3 is really changing how the internet is thought of and how the internet is processing. And very soon you might be using blockchain or smart contracts without knowing what they're doing, because you don't have to understand what's happening under the hood. But there's people who are building on those platforms, and AI is being used more and more, and it's getting more advanced to the point that now some phones are releasing with AI built-in features already. So this is something that's going to be exciting, especially for the young people. In years to come, this is the way forward. So those of you wanting to get involved in this, just start learning this now, because this is literally the future, and companies are building startups and ideas are being developed within this area. So thank you very much for your time, and it was a pleasure speaking to you.